Well, the people of God just could not seem to catch a break. It had been one thing after another. I mean, they had the whole being saved from years and a lifetime in bondage in Egypt and the plagues that fell from God's hand. And then they had the whole stress of the Red Sea thing, with the sea parting and then, swallowing up and drowning the Egyptian army. And then you had, the wandering in the desert with, hunger and thirst and wondering where food and water was going to come from. It was one thing after another. Every time, God came through for them right on time, providing for them protection and food and water and everything that they needed. But with all of this excitement, I would imagine that Moses wanted to just maybe put in a vacation request with God, maybe even a request for retirement. After all, he was 80 years old at the time, and he's probably had it up to here with all of the crises. I imagine he wanted nothing more than to get God's people to the promised land and just kick back and enjoy retirement, enjoy old age. But that wasn't to be. It was just a day or so after the last crisis when word comes to him, we're under attack. It was the Amalekites. Now, the Amalekites are actually distant relatives of the Israelites. They were like descendants of Esau's grandson, Amalek. But this brutal people inhabited the plains of the Sinai Peninsula where the Israelites now were, and the Amalekites didn't like these new wanderers using their resources, using their land, and so they attacked. And I would imagine Moses just kind of breathing deeply and wondering, will it ever end? Can I get a break? Can't we get one day without a crisis? And Moses had to realize the incredible threat that this new attack posed to his people. This was a serious threat. I mean, there were old people and children and women in the crowd. Lives were at stake. The people of God were at stake. This was a major threat. As a matter of fact, Moses records in the book of Deuteronomy that when the Amalekites attacked, they were picking off those who were weak and tired, those who had been kind of straggling behind, lagging behind the rest of the people. So he knew people were dying. This was a real threat. Everything is at stake. So what does Moses do, this great leader of God? He calls young Joshua. This is the first time we're introduced to Joshua, is Exodus chapter 17, as the Amalekites are attacking. He calls young Joshua. He says, I want you to choose some men, some strong men, some fighting men from all of the tribes. I want you to put together an army, and tomorrow you're going to go out and do what only you can do. You are going to fight the Amalekites. And I, as an 80-year-old man, I'm going to do what only I can do. And what does Moses do as his people are threatened, as the promises of God are being threatened by this invading army? He climbs a hill, and he does what any 2-year-old child would do if put in similar circumstances where they're afraid and they want the protection of their dad. He raises his hands on the top of a hill. Today we're starting the series on prayer called iPray. And I just think prayer is one of those topics that is always relevant. Because like the Israelites, sometimes or often our lives just seem like one thing after another. Right? It's just like, can I catch a break? I just got over that crisis, and here I am now in this crisis. And sometimes we just feel like we need some supernatural help, someone, something bigger than me to step into my circumstances and to do something that I can't do. And it's for this reason, because we all experience these crises that are out of our control, I believe pretty much everybody prays. Right? Regardless of where you are on the spiritual kind of spectrum, whether you're here today and you would consider yourself to be a spiritual skeptic and you're still trying to figure out the Jesus thing, is he the Son of God, or is God real, or wherever you are, maybe you were invited today by someone from work you thought was pretty, or they promised you lunch, or I don't know how they got you here, but you didn't even know what we were going to be talking about today. But I would bet that there are times when you pray. And for those of you who are been maybe lifelong followers of Jesus, you pray. And depending on where we are on the spiritual spectrum and our spiritual journey, our prayers may look different, they may sound different, they may have different frequency, but we all pray. And our prayers may just be, God, are you even there? Or it could be, help, I need you. Our prayers can sound more like, God, where are you? Or why aren't you doing anything? But prayer is something that seems, I think, intuitive to most people because, again, there are those times when we know we need something, we need someone bigger than us to intercede in our lives, to come through for us. And so, again, regardless of where we are spiritually, this series is for you. And I'm glad you're here. And I hope you're going to be back again next week. But more than just prayer being for those times in our lives when we're in crisis, for those who are committed to growing and developing as passionate followers of Christ, prayer is vital. I mean, there's nothing more vital in a growing and deepening relationship with Jesus than prayer. We can't do it without prayer. And so it just seems right that as we look at maybe things happening in our lives, as we look at where we are as a church, it just seems right that we would spend some time this fall kind of regrounding ourselves, refocusing ourselves in this most vital of practices, prayer. And so I'm asking you that as we kind of as a church and as individuals kind of refocus, kind of redouble our attention to this principle, as we kind of ratchet up the value of prayer here, that you would make it a point to be here for the next 6 weeks. That you would be here as we kind of talk about laying a foundation for prayer, maybe establishing some new habits, talking about obstacles to our prayer lives, questions about prayer that many of us wrestle with. And more than just commit to be here for the next 6 weeks, I want to also ask you if you'd be willing to get into a small group for the next 6 weeks where you can kind of unpack what we talk about here on Saturday morning in living rooms all over our community. So you could say, how is this working out in your life? And how could this work out in my life? That we could apply this to our lives. Consider it kind of a 1-2 punch every week to revitalize your prayer life, Sabbath morning, and then again in living rooms in our community in small groups. So, back to our story. The Amalekites are attacking, and the battle begins, and so does Moses' prayer. Joshua and his army, they go out to meet the Amalekites in the valley. And Moses, he goes up onto the hill to lift his hands in surrender of himself and his people to God. And there he is with his older brother Aaron, and he's got another old guy named Hur with him. And these 3 old guys are on this hilltop just lifting their hands to God, asking for his intervention. And the battle continues through the morning, and it continues into the middle of the afternoon. And at some point, Moses and Aaron and Hur, they see this correlation that when their hands are up and they're praying, the battle swings toward the Israelites and they begin to kind of advance and they're winning. But when their hands are down, the Amalekites advance. And they're seeing this correlation. That hands up, Israelites winning. Hands down, Amalekites winning. Up, down. You know. And they got to wonder, what is going on here? What does this mean? And this is a very formative and crucial time for the nation of Israel. They had just come out of slavery, and God is just establishing a relationship with these people. He's revealing himself to them, saying, this is what relationship with me is going to look like. He did it through the plagues in Egypt. He did it through the Red Sea experience. He did it through providing water from a rock and manna and food and quail. Everything was a lesson kind of establishing this relationship. And the point God was making was that it was a relationship. That he was to be a father to them. That when they had a need, he wanted to meet that need, whether that need be for water to drink or food to eat or protection from an invading army. He would guide them through the wilderness. Whatever they needed, he would be there for them. All they needed to do was ask. And this is the lesson he is teaching them. You ask, I will provide. That is the relationship. I am your father. He stands ready to help them regardless of what they're going through. And this is, I believe, the lesson he's again trying to teach them through this battle with the Amalekites. And I recently heard Bill Hybels teaching on this very passage, and he put this point so well. I'm just going to kind of steal from him. I tweaked it a little bit, but if you get nothing else today, take this with you, okay? Because this is the lesson God is teaching to the Hebrews at this formative part of their relationship, and this is the lesson I think that is still applicable for us today that he wants us to leave with today, and it's just this: that nothing determines the outcome of life's battles like the position of your hands. I'm going to say that again. Nothing determines the outcome of life's battles, your battles, like the position of your hands. So Moses and Aaron and Hur, they're on the top of this hill. They notice a correlation that when they're praying with their hands lifted high, the battle is going their way. And when they're not, when their hands are down, the Israelites are getting pushed back in defeat. And we don't know how long it took them to figure this out, or who figured it out first, or whether there's some skepticism. Really? Should we try it again? I mean, is it really working this way? But they figured it out. The outcome of the battle was being determined by the position of their hands. And God was teaching Moses, and he was teaching the Israelites something so significant. And again, I think he wants to remind us of this truth again this morning, that the position of your hands will determine the outcome of the battles of your life. It's going to determine the battles of your life more than anything else. It's not how hard you fight, but it's where are your hands. It's not how much you work or try or strive or sweat in life's battles, but it's where are your hands. It's not about your effort as much as it is about the position of your hands. I mean, working hard and trying hard and effort, they're all important in life's battles. After all, Joshua did have to go with his army into the valley and fight. But it wasn't Joshua's skill in battle. It wasn't his military prowess that won the day. It was the position of Moses' hands. Because when those hands were up, Joshua was winning, and when they were down, he was defeated. And in the same way, nothing determines the outcome of your battles than the position of your hands. And so I'm asking you today, where are your hands? And it's clear that lifted hands are a symbol for prayer. We see this all through the Bible, countless ways. Let me just share with you a couple examples. Moses said in Exodus chapter 9, he said, I will spread out, or some translations say, lift up my hands in prayer to the Lord. So this is Moses' way of praying, spreading out his hands, lifting up his hands. The psalmist writes, may my prayer be set before you like incense. May the lifting up of my hands be like the evening sacrifice. Again, this being a form of prayer, just the lifting up of my hands. Or the Apostle Paul writes to the young pastor Timothy in the New Testament. He says, therefore, I want men everywhere to lift up holy hands in prayer. This is a symbol of praying. You don't have to pray this way, but it's one way to pray. It's one posture that we take in prayer. And when we understand what prayer is, this is the most appropriate posture to take. Because when we start to understand that prayer is simply reaching up to our Father and asking Him to take care of us, to pick us up, to hold us, how appropriate is this? I'll never forget my oldest son, Luke, who's almost 20 now, but when he was 2 and 3 years old, several times a day for several years, he would come up to me with his hands up, and he'd look me in the face, he'd say, Daddy, I want to hold you. I want to hold you, Daddy. And what he's saying to me is, pick me up, hold me. I want to see the world from your perspective. You're pretty high up, Dad. I want to get up where you are. I want to see the world as you see it. I want to feel your arms around me. I want to be close to you. And this is what we do when we pray. God, Father, Abba, Dad, pick me up. I want to see the world from your perspective. I want to be wrapped in your arms. I want to be taken care of by you. And what an appropriate posture for prayer. And even more, the lifting of hands is a symbol of submission and surrender to our Father. How appropriate for prayer. When I lift my hands and I pray, it aligns everything in my mind and in my heart to the way things really are in the universe. God is God. I am not. You know, the theologian Daniel Hawk says that we all have a basic problem as humans. I relate to this. He says that the human problem is that everyone believes that there is a God, and I am it. That we get so focused on doing and accomplishing and succeeding and problem solving and running our lives. We live as though we are God. And we forget that God has all of the power and wants to be involved in the daily activity and decisions and outcomes of my life. And so because of this, prayer is so much more than just like a shopping list of things that I present to God. Certainly, God wants to hear my request. Jesus makes that clear. We'll talk more about that as we go through the series. But prayer is more than just, God, give me this, and help me with that. Hands lifted is a realignment of all things in the universe, in my mind and in my heart. It is a surrender, and prayer is a reminder, you are God. I am not. It's a realignment of everything. It's me climbing down from the center of my own universe, the control center of my own universe. It's me getting off of the throne of my own heart and getting God's perspective on things. And so as I lift my hands in prayer to God, I see me as I really am. Small, insignificant, temporary, pretty much powerless. And then I see God who He is. Eternal, sovereign, loving, good. How appropriate that Moses would lift his hands to his Father in prayer. Psalm 46:10 says this. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." And really more than anything, I think this is the attitude and the activity of prayer. Just be still and know that He is God. You know, if you look for a definition of prayer, there's a lot of good ones out there, and I've often heard, one of my favorites has been, prayer is simply communicating with God. And that's a good one. I have nothing bad to say about that, but I think an even better one is, rather than prayer is communicating with God, I think prayer is communing with God. Prayer is just being with the God who is already present. And sometimes that means communication. Sometimes that means talking. Sometimes that means listening. But other times it just means being still and knowing that He is God, realigning my mind and heart to the reality of the universe, that He is the only God and there is no other. Being still and knowing that He is God. Philip Yancey has written an amazing book on prayer. It's simply called Prayer. I'll be referencing it several times throughout this series. If you've never read it, pick it up. It's a fantastic book. But he points out in his book that this word for be still, this verb, it's an imperative. But in the Latin, the word for be still is actually vacate, from which we get the word vacate, right? But more importantly, from which we get the word vacation, right? You guys see that, right? Vacation. Ooh, wait a minute. And so what God is almost inviting us to when He says, be still and know that I am God, He's saying, would you just take a break? Would you take a vacation from running your own life and thinking that you're God? Take a holiday from being God for a while and let me be God. And Yancey goes on to point out that too often we view prayer as this like serious chore, and we've got to like work through it and get through our list and say everything and make sure that we do all the right things, but we miss the point. God is telling us to take a break, that we can stop doing all of those, important things that we have to do in our capacity as God of our own lives, and let it go. And let God be God for a while. Leave the details of my life to the real God. And so I'm asking you, have you ever thought of prayer as just being a break, a vacation, a holiday from the stuff of your life, from running things, from being in control? How liberating that can be if we all took time to do that on a regular basis, to just be still, to vacate, take a holiday, and know that He is God. He is the one who is in control. And all of this is symbolized by the lifting of our hands. You are God. I am not. Hallelujah. Hands lifted in our story is contrasted with hands down, hands at our side. Moses, at times, he drops his hands, and when he does, the battle goes against them. And for the sake of the point we're making this morning, I don't know if this is actually happening in Moses' heart, but for the sake of the point we're making this morning, we can say that hands down represents, I'm in charge. I got this. I can do it. I can handle it. And so, hands up, God is God. Hands down, I can do it. And so we begin to see why nothing determines the outcome of life's battles like the position of our hands. Have you noticed this in your life? Have you seen the correlation in your life? I remember it was my last year in seminary. I was getting ready to graduate. I was already hired by the Rocky Mountain Conference, who basically oversees all the churches in Wyoming and Colorado. And I had been having conversations with our conference president, who was my boss, about where I would be going to work after seminary. And now understand, when you're just coming out of seminary and you haven't been ordained yet, you're considered an intern, which means you have no rights. You have no say. You have no voice. The conference says this is where you're going to go, and you go there, and you're like, thank you, sir. Can I have another? Whatever. You just do what you're told. And so they told me that when I graduated from seminary, I would be going to these two churches on the Front Range. And when I heard where I was going to go, and I kind of investigated a little bit, I kind of panicked. And I said, this is not good. This is not good. There are good people in that church who love God, but they are not going to want me as their pastor. I will blow those churches up. This will not be good at all. They're not going to like the ideas that I have for church. They're not going to like the energy with which I want to implement those ideas. This is not going to be a good thing. The church will either explode from shock, or I will wither up and die from conforming. And so I began a battle with my boss, the conference president, and to be honest, my hands were down. And part of that was being in seminary, always battling ideas and everything. You're just always thinking and talking and these things. So I just thought, I'm going to use my reason and my rationale and just clear logic to convince him why this is a bad idea and why he should send me somewhere else. And so I remember sending him quotes from the Bible. I was sending him James White quotes. James White is one of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I remember sending this quote where James White said, no pastor should get a paycheck until he's raised up a new church. And I said, just let me go raise up a new church in Denver. Just set me free in Denver. Let me start a church. I'll do that. But don't send me to those churches, please. Last one, Byard Parks, the pastor who had been the pastor in Franktown, where we planted from, he decided that he was leaving. He was going to be going to the mission field. This is 1999, early 2000. And he asked if I would consider taking his place. And I did a little investigation on the Franktown church. I said, wow, this looks like a perfect fit. And Byard recommended my name. And that became my new rally cry. Give me Franktown or give me death. Because I knew it was either or. It was either go there or I'm going to die. So I'm doing everything in my power to convince my boss, please don't send me to that place I know I shouldn't go. But he would not budge. He was like, no, this is where you're going. I'm sorry. Get used to it. I remember it was just a month or two before I graduated from seminary that I finally came to the place of surrender. I finally realized, where are my hands? My hands are down. I'm trying to win this battle on my own, but this is not my battle. This is God's battle. I remember repenting, and I remember lifting my hands to Him, and I stopped arguing, and I started praying. And I was just, God, I'm sorry. I tried to run things. This is your church. This is your bride. I am only your servant. Forgive me for trying to control your plans with my wisdom. I give up. And, you probably guessed the rest of the story if you don't know it already. But I didn't go to those two churches. Everybody won on that. But 2 weeks before I graduated, the conference called and said they'd changed their minds, that they wanted to had me go and interview at Franktown, and Kim and I, we just celebrated. It wasn't until several years later that I heard the rest of the story. One of our vice presidents of the conference at the time was Frank Tochterman. He was assigned to go to Franktown and kind of interview them about who the next pastor would be. Julie, maybe you were in that meeting. But Byard had coached folks on talk about Dave, bring his name up. We should get him. And so some people did, and the conference guy, Frank, said, no, I'm sorry, he's spoken for. He's going to the other churches, and that's that. We're moving on. And so everyone thought that was the end. But Frank told me later that after that meeting, he went to the car, and he said he got behind the wheel. He said he'll never forget. It's like God grabbed him by his collar and shook him and said, I have other plans. I want the intern here. And I'll never be able to imagine what might have happened had I not finally just lifted my hands and surrendered. Had Frank not been willing to listen to God, I wonder, where would I be? Where would my family be? Would I still be in ministry? But it just, again, goes to show I had to come to the place where I realized it's not up to me, that I have to lift my hands. It's up to Him. Nothing determines the outcome of life's battles like the position of our hands. So if this is true, why don't we pray more? I mean, if God is so willing to get involved in our lives and wants to provide, why don't we pray more? And, Jesus said, ask, and He said, seek, and He said, knock, and the door will be open to you. But why don't we do more asking? Why don't we do more seeking? Why don't we do more knocking? And there are a lot of reasons for that, I know. And we're going to be addressing a lot of those as the series goes on. But for now, just look at verse 12 of Exodus chapter 17. It says, Moses' hands grew tired. Moses' hands grew tired, and so they dropped. And when Moses' hands dropped, he stopped praying, and the battle went against the Israelites. And now we may wonder, why did he stop praying just because his hands got tired? Have you ever wondered that? I've kind of wrestled with that question myself. Okay, so your hands are tired. We get that, Moses. That doesn't mean you have to stop praying. You could pray with your hands down, Moses. Just lower your hands and keep praying. But as we put ourselves in Moses' shoes, if you've attempted to pray continuously for long periods of time, like all day, or over a season of your life, you know how difficult and how tiring praying can be. That there will be times when you're praying for something and you realize how hard it is to keep the mind focused. You realize how hard it is to continue to pray for that thing when you see God doing nothing and you've been praying for months, maybe you've been praying for years. Staying focused on prayer is tiring. And so maybe when Moses' hands were down, maybe his mind wandered. Maybe that's why he couldn't pray anymore when his hands were down. Or maybe he didn't think he needed to pray anymore because his hands were up and the Israelites were winning. All right, I think we got it. I'm not praying anymore. Oh, wait a minute. The Amalekites, I got to pray again. We don't know why Moses stopped praying. But we do know that he got tired and he lost focus. And I could relate not only to the wandering mind in prayer and being tired from prayer, but I could also think of many times in my life when I prayed for something and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed and I just got tired of praying. I lost energy. What about you? Can you relate to that? I mean, maybe you've prayed for a child or a spouse or a friend to come to Christ and you prayed for years and you just don't see God doing anything. Or maybe you've prayed for your health to improve. Or you prayed for healing for yourself or for someone else and you've prayed and you've prayed and you've prayed and nothing and you get tired of praying. Your hands grow tired. Or maybe you've prayed for a job because you need a job. Or you prayed for a spouse because you need a spouse. Or you prayed for a child because you want a child. Maybe you prayed that God would take away that temptation, that God would take away that sin. And you've prayed, and you've prayed, and you've prayed, and it just keeps coming back. The reality is, we could easily grow tired of praying. So what does Moses do? What happens in our story? In verse 12, it says, when Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone, and they put it under him, and he sat on it. Have a seat, Moses. You look tired. We want to help. It says, Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset, and God got the victory. There are times when we pray when we can't do it alone. There can be times when we get weary, we get frustrated, we lose courage, we lose focus, we lose faith. And there are times when you're praying for something so big, so monumental, that you can't do it on your own. And you're going to need someone to come up alongside you and say, can I hold your hands up? Can I pray with you? Can I pray for you? While your faith is weak, can I have faith for you and walk with you? I know how difficult it could be to pray for something so big and just wish there were people on my side holding my arms up. I know it's not probably reality, but there are times when I feel like I am the only one praying for this church. That I'm praying these big prayers, that we would be salt and light in this community, that we would transform Parker by living out the gospel in our workplaces, in our blocks. I pray that God would hold families together strong. I pray that God would transform our hearts and be center of everything. I pray that our kids would be raised up to know and love Him and follow Him all of their lives. I pray that people far from God would be invited here and that they would come to know Jesus and start on a relationship with Him in this church. I pray big prayers for this church. And sometimes, probably not true, but sometimes it feels like I'm praying by myself. And my arms get tired. And it would be good to know that other people are praying these prayers with me. Yet this is an invitation. That if you want to pray these prayers with me and with Pastor Lisa, we would love to have you praying for our church. But the point is that all of us get these big things in our lives, and when we feel like we're praying by ourselves, it gets tiring. And we need to know that other people are kind of coming up alongside of us. And so I'm asking, what are those big issues in your life? Those things that you're getting tired of praying for, and you need someone to come up alongside of you. In a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about the power of praying together. And so who could be the Moses and Aaron in your life? Maybe that's going to be someone in your small group this week. You're going to share a prayer need, and they're going to say, hey, let's pray for that. We can hold your arms up in that. Or what Moseses do you know who are praying for big things, and you can see they're growing tired? You need to come up alongside of them. You need to lift their arms up. Tell them to sit down and hold their arms up so they could pray until God gets the victory. Nothing determines the outcome of life's battles like the position of your hands. In the end of our story in Exodus chapter 17, guess who wins? The Israelites, right? Because of the position of Moses' hands. And regardless of where you are or what you're going through, I'm wondering if we could be a people who pray, who bring our battles and the battle of others to God. Would we raise our hands to the Father, surrender ourselves, surrender our power, surrender our will, and ask and seek and knock? And so, in response to this truth, I just want to ask you to do two things. Two things in response to this. Two things you can implement today, tomorrow, Monday. These are two things I want to ask you to do. First of all, I want to ask you to get into a group. I want to ask you to get somewhere in a circle, somewhere this week, in a home in a neighborhood somewhere, so that you can unpack this. So that you can say, what is this going to look like in my life? That other people can encourage you, you can encourage others. And last week, we kind of kicked off small groups. We talked about them. We had sign-ups in the foyer, and your response was amazing. Thank you very much. God is working at Newday. We started 9 new groups last week, and all of them filled up. We have maybe 3 or 4 groups that have 1, maybe 2 spots left. And so if you didn't get in a group last week, maybe you weren't here, or maybe you're still thinking, we're going to have some group leaders in the foyer when you leave today who are going to be starting their groups this week. If you're looking for a group, just kind of ask some questions, see when their groups are meeting, where they're meeting, see if it fits with your schedule, get in a group. But if not, we are putting together overflow groups. And so that means just put your name down, tell us what nights don't work for you, and then we're going to be forming new groups this year. We'll give you a leader, and for the next 8 weeks, we're going to track this series together, this topic together of prayer. So number 1, get in a group today before you leave. Second, I want to ask you to find a place this week where you can commit 9 minutes a day to raising your hands to God. Now, If you already have a time and a place where you're praying and it's more than 9 minutes, then forget this, okay? Keep doing what you're doing. But if you would say, you know what, right now, I don't have any designated time where I'm getting before God, realigning everything, remembering He's God, I'm not, letting Him fight my battles, then I want to ask you to block off time to get alone with God, to lift your hands to Him, to take a vacation every day this week from being God. I'm asking you to set aside 9 minutes every day to pray. Why 9 minutes? What's one of the biggest things that keep us from praying in the morning? Sleep, right? So when you think of 9 minutes of sleep, what comes to your mind? Snooze, that's right. We hit that button, that snooze, just 9 more minutes of sleep. I don't know how many times you snooze. I'm a 1 to 2 time snoozer, right? Maybe you're a 3 or 4 timer. Maybe you are so disciplined you don't snooze at all. Or maybe it's because you're so undisciplined you don't have any time because you sleep up to the last minute. I don't know. But I am asking, would you give one snooze to Jesus? Would you take one more snooze this week in your life? And maybe if you're not a snoozer, you got to wake up 9 minutes earlier. But I'm asking, whether you wake up at night or in the morning, that in the first 30 minutes of your day, that you would block off 9 minutes and give that time to Jesus to raise your hands. Now, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Find a quiet place. Now, maybe you're in a really small apartment and you have to go into a closet. I've been there, all right? Find a closet. Go in the bathroom. If you have to go out in your garage, in the car, or in the garage, just go somewhere where you will have an uninterrupted 9 minutes. And then block off all distractions. Do not take your cell phone. Don't take your iPod or iPad. Don't take any electronics. Get them far from you. And for 9 minutes, just unplug. The world will go on. Okay? And so find your quiet place, and you're going to get rid of all the electronics, all the to-do lists, and then take a vacation from being in charge of your life. Just surrender and lift up your hands. Now, when we begin our 9 minutes of prayer, maybe I'm going to ask you to begin with your hands up. And maybe you can't hold your hands up in the air for 9 minutes, and I know I can't, but at least start here. And then just realign things and say, God, I am here to begin my day knowing and reminding myself that I am small and insignificant, and the things that I think are so important in my life today, in 2 weeks or 2 years, will be forgotten. But in 2 millennia, you will still be there. You are God and I am not. Forgive me for being God of my own life. Get me off the throne of my own heart, and you be God. I'm taking a break. You be God. And then just be still and know God. You don't have to say anything. Just get on your knees before. You don't have to kneel. You can sit, whatever. Just get your hands up and realign your universe and see things as they really are. Maybe you want to try another exercise. Sometimes I'll do palms up, palms down. If you don't want to talk a lot, you just want to be with God, I'll sometimes be sitting in a chair. Just put my palms down, and I'll just think about all the things in my life that I want to let go to God. I'll say, God, take my stress, take my fear. That person that I was rude with yesterday, would you forgive me? Give me power to ask for forgiveness. God, would you just take all of these things, and I'll just think for 5 minutes about things that I want God to take, and I'm just visualizing, releasing those things to God. And then I'll turn my palms up to receive from God. And I'll think of all the things that I would like to receive from God today. Power to live for Him, opportunities to speak a word for Him, the ability to love someone, to add value to someone. God, in that meeting today, would you just give me the ability to listen rather than speak? Palms up. I'm asking you, would you take 9 minutes every day this week to raise your hands? Because nothing determines the outcome of your life's battles like the position of your hands.